The thundering hooves of distant riders made Delilah Lawson look up from her washboard, squinting at the horizon where dust billowed across the New Mexico territory. It was 1878, 2 years since her husband had been lowered into the unforgiving earth, and still the sound of approaching horses made her heart race with momentary hope before reality crashed down again. Wiping her hands on her faded apron, Delilah shielded her eyes from the harsh summer sun. At 26, she had already lived several lifetimes, a young bride at 18, a widow by 24, and now the sole proprietor of a struggling way station along the Santa Fe Trail. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her face, softening the determined set of her jaw.
Ma.
Riders coming. 8-year-old Samuel, her only child and the spitting image of his father, came running around the corner of their modest cabin. "I see them," Delilah replied, counting 5 horses approaching. "Go fetch some fresh water from the well. They'll likely be thirsty." Samuel nodded and scampered off while Delilah straightened her dress and tried to make herself presentable. Travelers meant income, and income meant survival for another week. Since Thomas had died in that awful mining accident, every penny counted. The riders slowed as they approached, and Delilah recognized the lead man as Yates Xavier, foreman of the Big Sky Ranch about 10 miles west. She had seen him in town occasionally, but they'd rarely exchanged more than polite nods. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. At perhaps 30 years of age, he had a reputation as a fair but no-nonsense boss who had built the Big Sky from nothing. "Afternoon, Mrs. Lawson," Yates called, removing his hat as he dismounted. His voice was deep and smooth, like good whiskey. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "What brings you and your men to Whispering Pines?" "Headed back from escorting a cattle buyer to Santa Fe," he explained, running a hand through his dark hair. "Thought we might trouble you for some water and perhaps a meal, if you're offering." Delilah nodded. "Water's free. Meals are 2 bits each. I've got stew and cornbread." "Sounds fair," Yates replied, reaching into his pocket for coins. His men dismounted, leading their horses to the water trough while Samuel watched with undisguised fascination. As Delilah turned to head inside and serve up the food, she caught Yates studying her with an intensity that made her pause. There was something in his gaze, not pity, which she had grown accustomed to seeing in the eyes of townsfolk, but something else she couldn't quite name. "Your boy's growing like a weed," Yates commented, following her to the porch. "Must be hard, managing this place on your own." Delilah stiffened. "We manage just fine, Mr. Xavier." He held up his hands in a peaceable gesture. "Didn't mean any offense, madam. Just making conversation." Inside the cabin, Delilah ladled stew into bowls with practiced efficiency while the men washed up outside. Her hands trembled slightly as she set out the cornbread. It had been months since she'd had this many people to feed at once, and she found herself strangely nervous under Yates Xavier's steady gaze. The men ate heartily, complimenting her cooking and sharing news from Santa Fe. Yates ate more quietly, occasionally asking Samuel questions about his chores and schooling. The boy answered eagerly, clearly enjoying the male attention. "Mrs. Lawson," Yates said as the meal wound down, "I understand you've been keeping this way station going on your own since your husband passed." Delilah nodded cautiously. "What of it? It's just that we've got a herd coming through next month. 50 head bound for the railroad at Las Vegas. My men and I would need accommodations for a night, plus meals. Could be good business for you." Hope fluttered in Delilah's chest. 50 cattle meant cowboys, and cowboys meant money. But she tempered her reaction. "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can," Yates replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll send word when we're a day out." After the men had gone, leaving a generous payment and thanks, Delilah stood on the porch, watching their retreating figures until they disappeared into the gathering dusk. "I like Mr. Xavier," Samuel announced, leaning against her skirt. "He knows lots about horses." Delilah smoothed her son's hair. "He seems decent enough." "And he kept looking at you, Ma," Samuel added with a child's blunt observation. "Like how Pa used to look at you." Delilah's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly dismissed the notion. "That's nonsense, Samuel. Mr. Xavier was just being polite. No man wants a widow with a child. Now help me clear these dishes." But that night, as the coyotes called in the distance and Samuel slept soundly in his small bed, Delilah found herself recalling the warmth in Yates Xavier's storm-gray eyes and wondering if perhaps her son had seen something she had missed. True to his word, a messenger arrived from Big Sky Ranch 4 weeks later announcing that Yates and his men would arrive with the cattle the following afternoon. Delilah spent the day in a flurry of preparation, baking extra bread, preparing a large pot of beans, and making sure the small bunkhouse was clean and ready for the cowboys. When the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, Delilah was ready. She had put on her second-best dress, a blue calico that Thomas had always said matched her eyes, and even pinched some color into her cheeks. Yates rode ahead of the herd, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. When he spotted Delilah waiting on the porch, a smile broke across his weathered face, transforming his serious countenance. "Mrs. Lawson," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Hope we're not too early." "Right on time, Mr. Xavier," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "Your men can use the bunkhouse once the cattle are settled. Supper will be ready at sunset." Yates nodded his thanks before turning to direct his men. Delilah watched the practiced way he gave orders, the respect evident in how the cowboys responded. He was a natural leader, firm but fair. As promised, supper was a lively affair. Delilah had set up tables outside under the cottonwood trees, and the cowboys ate with relish, telling stories and laughing. Samuel sat among them, eyes wide with admiration as the men recounted tales of cattle drives and adventures on the range. Yates ate at a smaller table with Delilah, discussing business at first payment for the accommodations, the route to the railroad, the price of beef. "Your stew is even better than I remembered," Yates commented, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Thank you," Delilah replied, feeling herself blush under his steady gaze. "It was my mother's recipe." "Where were you from, before New Mexico?" "Missouri," she answered. "Thomas and I came west after we married. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "Dreams are what brought most of us out here. Some pan out, some don't. And what about you, Mr. Xavier? What was your dream?" A ghost of a smile played at his lips. "Land. Freedom. A place of my own where I answered to no one but myself and God." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Big Sky is that dream. 3,000 acres now and growing." "You've done well for yourself," Delilah observed. "In some ways," Yates agreed, his expression turning more serious. "But a man can have all the land in the territory and still find his house mighty empty at night." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. Delilah looked away first, rising to collect empty plates. Yates stood to help her, their hands brushing as they reached for the same dish. The brief contact sent a shock through Delilah's body, and she nearly dropped the plate. "I've got it," she said quickly, stepping back. "You and your men must be tired. There's clean water in the bunkhouse for washing up." Yates studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Lawson." He hesitated, then added, "Delilah." The sound of her given name on his lips made her pause. It had been so long since anyone but Samuel had called her that. She nodded quickly and retreated to the safety of her kitchen. Later, after Samuel had been tucked into bed with stories of cattle drives filling his dreams, Delilah stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars speckling the vast sky like diamond dust. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Beautiful night," came Yates's voice from the shadows of the porch. He stepped forward, a lit cigarette glowing briefly as he took a draw. Delilah startled slightly. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." "Too many thoughts keeping me awake," he replied, leaning against the porch railing. "Mind if I join you?" She nodded her assent, and they stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds and the occasional lowing of cattle in the nearby corral. "Your boy reminds me of myself at that age," Yates finally said, full of questions and eager to learn. "He misses his father," Delilah admitted softly. "It's hard for a boy without a man to show him the way." Yates exhaled a stream of smoke. "You're doing a fine job with him, from what I can see." "It's not enough," Delilah sighed. "This place, it's barely keeping us afloat. I've been thinking of selling, moving to town where Samuel could go to a proper school." "And what would you do in town?" Delilah shrugged. "Take in laundry, perhaps. Or sewing. I'm good with a needle." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "Seems a waste," he finally said. "This is good land. Strategic location. With some improvements, this way station could be quite profitable." "Improvements require money, Mr. Xavier. Something I'm sorely lacking." "Yates," he corrected gently. "And sometimes what's needed isn't money so much as a partner." Delilah's head snapped up, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." Yates stubbed out his cigarette and took a step closer. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, Delilah. I'm simply saying that sometimes two people working together can accomplish more than one alone." "I've been alone for 2 years," Delilah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've learned to manage." "Managing isn't living," Yates replied, reaching out slowly to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverential. "And sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let someone help." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes and turned away. "It's late. We should both get some rest." Yates didn't press. He simply nodded, wished her good night, and disappeared into the darkness toward the bunkhouse. Delilah barely slept that night, her mind racing with thoughts of Yates Xavier and his enigmatic words. Was he offering business help? Friendship? Or something more that she dared not even consider? Morning came too quickly, and with it the bustle of cowboys preparing to move the herd. Delilah served a hearty breakfast of biscuits, gravy, and eggs, trying not to notice how Yates's eyes followed her around the yard. As the men prepared to leave, Yates approached her one last time. "I meant what I said last night," he told her quietly. "Think about it. I'll be back this way in 2 weeks. We could talk more then." Before Delilah could respond, Samuel came running up. "Are you leaving, Mr. Xavier?" "Afraid so, partner," Yates replied, crouching down to the boy's level. "Gotta get these cattle to the railroad." Samuel's face fell. "Will you come back?" "Count on it," Yates promised, ruffling the boy's hair. "And maybe next time, if your ma agrees, I could show you how to throw a lasso." Samuel's eyes lit up, and he turned to Delilah with a pleading look. "Can he, ma? Please?" Delilah hesitated, then nodded. "If Mr. Xavier has time when he returns." Yates stood, his eyes meeting hers over Samuel's head. "I'll make time," he said simply, and something in his voice made Delilah believe him. The 2 weeks that followed were among the longest of Delilah's life. She found herself cleaning areas of the way station that hadn't seen a scrub brush in months, mending curtains, and even splurging on a new tablecloth when she went into town for supplies. "You expecting company, Delilah?" asked Mrs. Peterson at the general store as she wrapped up the tablecloth. "Just trying to keep the place presentable for travelers," Delilah replied evasively. Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Heard Yates Xavier and his men stopped by your place with a herd. He's quite the catch, that one. Owns the biggest spread west of here, and not a wife to share it with." Delilah felt her cheeks warm. I'm just running a business, Martha. Nothing more. If you say so, dear, the older woman replied with a knowing smile. But a widow with a young son could do worse than catching the eye of a man like Xavier. Delilah left the store with her purchases and a head full of conflicting thoughts. It had been 2 years since Thomas died. Was it disloyal to feel this flutter of anticipation at the thought of Yates returning? And even if she did allow herself to feel something, what respectable man would want a widow with a child in tow? On the appointed day, Delilah found herself watching the horizon more than attending to her chores. By mid-afternoon, when there was still no sign of riders, disappointment began to settle heavily in her chest. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps it had all been politeness and nothing more. Samuel, who had been watching for Yates as eagerly as his mother, eventually gave up and went to feed the chickens. Delilah returned to her mending, telling herself it was for the best. She had no business dreaming of a new beginning. The sun was starting to dip toward the western mountains when the sound of a single horse approaching made Delilah look up. Yates Xavier rode into view, alone this time, his tall figure silhouetted against the orange sky. Delilah's heart leaped into her throat. She smoothed her hair, adjusted her apron, and stepped onto the porch just as Yates reached the yard. "You're late," she called, trying to sound casual despite the tremor in her voice. Yates dismounted, a smile breaking across his face. "Had some business in town that took longer than expected," he explained, leading his horse to the water trough. "Thought you might have given up on me. Samuel would never have forgiven me if I'd turned you away. He's been practicing with a rope all week." Yates chuckled. "Where is the young cowboy?" "Feeding chickens around back. He'll be beside himself when he sees you've arrived." As if on cue, Samuel came racing around the corner of the house, letting out a whoop when he spotted Yates. "You came back. Said I would, didn't I?" Yates replied, crouching down to Samuel's level. "And a man always keeps his word. Did you bring a rope? Can you show me how to throw it now? Please?" Yates glanced up at Delilah, who nodded her permission. "Go ahead. Supper won't be ready for an hour yet." While Yates took Samuel to the corral for his promised lasso lesson, Delilah hurried inside to prepare the meal. She had planned something special: venison stew with wild onions and the last of her precious store of dried apples for a cobbler. As she worked, she could hear Samuel's excited shouts and Yates's patient instructions floating through the open window. By the time she called them in, Samuel was flushed with excitement and success.
"Ma."
"I caught the fence post 3 times. Mr. Xavier says I'm a natural." "That's wonderful, Samuel," Delilah replied, setting the food on the table. "Now go wash up properly before you sit down." When Samuel had scampered off, Delilah found herself alone with Yates for the first time since his arrival. "Thank you for taking time with him," she said softly. "It means the world to him." "It's my pleasure," Yates replied, his eyes warm. "He's a fine boy. You've raised him well." Delilah busied herself with the stew pot, avoiding his gaze. "Will you be staying the night before you head back to Big Sky?" "If you'll have me," Yates answered. "Actually, I was hoping we might talk after supper. About what I mentioned before I left." Delilah nodded, her pulse quickening. "I'd like that." Dinner was a lively affair, with Samuel regaling them with stories from his schoolbook and Yates describing life on the ranch. Delilah found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years. There was an ease between the 3 of them that felt strangely like family. After Samuel had been tucked into bed with a special goodnight from Yates, Delilah poured 2 cups of coffee and joined Yates on the porch. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and pine. "I've thought about what you said," Delilah began, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "About partnerships." Yates nodded, his expression serious in the lamplight. "And I'm not sure what exactly you're proposing, Mr. Xavier." "Yates," he corrected gently. "And I'm proposing several things, actually." He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. First, a business arrangement. I need a reliable stop between Big Sky and Santa Fe for my cattle drives and supply runs. You need investment to make this place what it could be. Delilah nodded slowly. And the other things? Yates took a deep breath. I'm proposing friendship, to start. The chance for us to get to know each other better. And perhaps, in time, something more. Delilah felt her chest tighten. Mr. Xavier Yates, I'm a widow, with a child. I come with complications. I'm well aware of who you are, Delilah, he replied, his voice low and earnest. I've been watching you for longer than you know. Even before Thomas died, I admired the way you handled this place, the way you raised your son. Surprise flickered across Delilah's face. You knew Thomas? Yates nodded. Not well, but we crossed paths in town occasionally. He spoke of you often, always with pride. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. I never thought, after he died, that anyone would want a widow. Yates finished for her, reaching out to take her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. Delilah, I've been waiting only for you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Delilah stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or pity. She found only sincerity and something that looked remarkably like hope. Why, she whispered, you could have any unmarried girl in the territory. Someone younger, without my burdens. Yates shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. I don't want a girl. I want a woman who understands what it means to build something, to lose something, to keep going when it would be easier to give up. His fingers tightened around hers. I want you, Delilah. If you'll have me. For a moment, Delilah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. 2 years of loneliness and struggle crashed over her, followed by a wave of something new possibility. Hope. I'm afraid, she admitted finally. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. We can learn together, Yates suggested, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. One day at a time. No rush, no pressure. Just two people figuring out if they might be better together than apart. Delilah looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, open, honest, and more handsome than any man had a right to be. I think I'd like that, she whispered. Yates's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then more certain as Delilah responded, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, Delilah felt lightheaded, her heart racing like a wild Mustang. Oh, she breathed. Yates chuckled, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. Been wanting to do that since the first time I rode up to your door. I'm glad you finally did, Delilah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They talked late into the night, planning improvements for the way station, discussing how their arrangement might work, and sharing stories of their lives before they met. When Delilah finally retired to her room, her lips were still tingling from Yates's goodnight kiss, and her mind was whirling with possibilities she had long since abandoned. Over the weeks that followed, Yates became a regular visitor at Whispering Pines. True to his word, he arranged for improvements to the way station, a new well, repairs to the bunkhouse, even a small addition to the main cabin to serve as a proper dining room for travelers. Samuel blossomed under Yates's attention, eagerly absorbing lessons about horses, cattle, and the land. Delilah watched them together, her heart full at the sight of her son bonding with a man who seemed to genuinely care for him. Yates courted Delilah with a patience and determination that gradually broke down the walls she had built around her heart. He brought her wildflowers and practical gifts like new cooking pots. He took her on rides across the countryside, showing her the beauty of the land through his eyes. And each time he left to return to Big Sky, His goodbye kisses grew longer and more difficult to end. 3 months after Yates's proposal of partnership, he arrived at Whispering Pines with a wagon full of supplies and a small box in his pocket. Delilah was outside hanging laundry when she heard the now familiar sound of his approach. "You're early," she called, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice as she set down her basket and went to meet him. Yates jumped down from the wagon, sweeping her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. "Couldn't wait another day," he murmured against her hair. When he set her down, his expression was more serious than usual. "Where's Samuel?" "At the Peterson farm for the day. Their boy invited him to help with the new foal." Yates nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. I wanted to talk to you alone first." Delilah felt a flutter of anxiety. "Is something wrong?" "Not a thing," he assured her, taking her hand and leading her to the porch steps. When they were seated, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Delilah, these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted softly. "I've tried to be patient, to give you time," Yates continued, his thumbs caressing her palms. "But I find myself counting the hours until I can ride back to you, and the miles between Big Sky and here seem longer every time I leave." Delilah's heart began to race. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you've been worried about what people might think a widow remarrying so soon. And I know you've been concerned about Samuel, about whether he's ready for a new father." Delilah nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in her throat. "So I asked him," Yates said simply. "You what?" "Last week, when we were fixing the corral together. I asked Samuel how he would feel if I asked to marry his mother." Yates's eyes crinkled at the corners. "He said he'd been wondering what was taking me so long." A laugh bubbled up from Delilah's chest, followed quickly by tears. "He said that." His exact words were, "Does this mean I get to live at the ranch with the horses?" Yates chuckled. "I told him he and his mother would always have a home with me, wherever that might be." With trembling fingers, Yates reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman who was strong enough to handle the Xavier stubbornness, but gentle enough to make our house a home." "And you think that's me?" Delilah whispered. Yates lifted her chin with his finger until their eyes met. "I know it's you, Delilah Lawson. I've known it since I first saw you standing on this very porch, too proud to accept help but too determined to give up." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Be my wife, Samuel's mother, the mistress of Big Sky, and the keeper of my heart." Tears spilled freely down Delilah's cheeks now. "Yes," she managed through a watery smile. "Yes to all of it." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd love again after Thomas," Delilah admitted softly. "I thought no one would want a widow with a young child." Yates brushed away a tear with his thumb. "And I thought I'd never find a woman who understood what it means to build something from nothing, to love the land the way I do." He smiled, pressing another gentle kiss to her lips. "Turns out we were both wrong. I've been waiting only for you, Delilah. And now I never have to wait again." 6 months later, Delilah Lawson became Delilah Xavier in a simple ceremony at the newly expanded and thriving Whispering Pines way station. Samuel stood proudly at Yates's side as his best man, his chest puffed out in the new suit Yates had ordered from back east. Whispering Pines continued to operate as a partnership between the Xaviers, becoming a well-known stop on the Santa Fe Trail while Delilah, Yates, and Samuel made their primary home at Big Sky Ranch. Delilah's practical skills and warm hospitality complemented Yates's business acumen and vision for the future. The following spring, their family grew with the birth of twin daughters, Emily and Rose, who would grow up knowing the story of how their father had waited patiently for their mother and how love could find a person even when they'd stopped looking for it. As Delilah often said in the years that followed, sometimes the heart knows what it wants long before the mind is ready to admit it. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin when we think our chance at love has already passed us by.